It's a bit complicated, but I will explain the terms during the presentation. A short bio, I am a professor. I've been a professor for more than 8 years. My areas of interest are informatics in education. It's basically the use of computers to support professors in the class or students to ease the learning process. For example, using simulators or gamers to attract them to the educational process. Specifically, I'm interested in the use of computers to support collaborative learning. It's what you are doing now. It's a collaborative process, and it's affect a very interesting theory in education. And I'm also interested in program education, and that's a hard topic in computer science education. And we all probably know about that. Students face a lot of difficulties when learning to program. So I'm trying to figure out some alternatives to mitigate this problem. I asked Charlie to go a bit more informal during the talk. I know it's already informal, but I'm expecting to help other students during the PhD. So I will describe the process that I did until now. I've been a research supervisor in my institution for about 5 years, and 4 to 5 years. I started in 2016 with informatics and education. So I was interested in how computers can support the educational process. We have huge computational power, networks, and it might be the future of education. So now we are using informatics education to do this talking. I started with game-based learning. It's a process where games are used to support the learning process because games are fun. So education sometimes isn't not fun, and we can try to motivate students using game-based learning. It started mainly because I was doing a game design class. So I grabbed some students to create a game about history education, history fact that happened in Brazil. It's called Revolta da Chibata. I don't know how to translate it to English. And we developed a mobile game to support this educational process. Later, I figured out that doing game-based learning is kind of complex process because game development is a complex process. So I left this research topic for a while. I moved to the program education. I kind of brought some concepts of game-based learning to program education. We developed in 2018 a board game to support students in the program education. And then later, I started reading more about this topic and knowing the concepts. So in 2018, I partnered with a friend that is a doctor in cognitive psychology, and he presented me to some topics that he was researching in his PhD. And one of these topics was self-regulated learning. I will present this concept now. It's very important for this talk. It's basically the study of how students learn, which strategies they do that are effective in this process. It's related to multiple areas, for example, cognitive, metacognitive, motivational, and behavioral. For example, it's known that when the student is reading a text and he highlights a piece of text, it's a behavioral action that helps him during the learning process. When the student do a flow chart in a program education, it's a cognitive process that helps him during the learning process. So I was kind of interested in understanding how to apply this thematic to program education. So in 2018, we partnered to start a research project, and it developed to a subfield of self-regulated learning called shared regulation, because self-regulated learning, as the name says, it's about the individual. regulation. So it's focused on only on one student during this regulation process. And shared regulation, it's about a multiple students doing a collaborative work, and they are regulating themselves. And it's a kind of new area of research in the learning research area. So I was interested in developing this field in my PhD associated with program education. I organized this presentation with tips or advice that I expected to help my colleagues. And as I said before, I it took about 4 years to get understand about my topic of interest. Maybe because I moved from my master's to my PhD, and it changed the topic that I researched in my master's. I was interested about um, the use of mobile phones in advertising. I completely moved to education. It's very different. So my first advice here is don't panic, because when I started reading about education, the more I read, I understood that I didn't really know anything about it. So I talked with some colleagues, and they are also facing this problem. It's a natural, okay? We have a lot of information available. We have to filter this information, and more importantly, it takes lots of time to grasp the concept of our area of interest. It's in fact a long time. So be relaxed, keep reading, and don't panic. Okay, it will take time for you to realize where you are and where you want to go. It's the first advice that I present. The second advice that I want to share is know your area of interest. You can use journals, then conference. So you have to know what are the main conference, what are the main journals that are available for you. Take a look into the call for papers. Look at what are they researched, what are they interested. And so this was how I found a shared regulation of learning. I found that a lot of journals were interested in this topic, so it probably is a hot topic for research. Take a look into the main topics and what are they really interested in this area, and who are the main authors. It's very important. I found my actual supervisor look at the main authors from my area of research. Antonio Mendes is a reference in program education, so it's very important for you to know who are the main authors in your area. And also look at the recent publications. It gives an insight where the area is going. So I really like to use the Google Scholar and filter by date, sorry, and look at the more recently publications to get understanding what they are doing. Okay, and in fact, the objective is to get a broader view of your area of interest. Uh, it's very hard to get this view. It takes a lot of time, but you are supposed to know what is interest for you and what is not. So you have to have a broader view of the concepts, of the topics, the subjects, and how they interrelate and where they are going. So it's my third advice here. And focus on systematic literature reviews. They are your friends. They give you insights about what authors have done and what are the open research questions that they found. It's very important, even if you're in the beginning of your research. So uh, go ahead and search about these literature reviews. Talk to peers, of course. It's very important to share what you're doing, to get understanding what your friends are doing. And so I think it's a very important process in your PhD. And your advisor is your friend also. So talk to him, get to understand what he believes that is the future of your topic. It's a very important um, way to go. Also, look at his papers, what he did in the past, what is his knowledge, so it can help you to understand if he can uh, help a bit more with a special topic. The fourth advisor is find an informal advisor for you. In fact, I said before that in 2018, I partnered with a friend. It's an old friend of mine since for more than 20 years. He has a Ph.D. in cognitive psychology, and today he is doing a postdoctoral in Chile. And this advisor here is, I told my advisor, my supervisor is very accessible, Antonio and Annabella. If you have an informal advisor, he can help you with some small problems that you get during your PhD. So we talk a lot about, I get his opinion about what I'm doing. It's kind of filtering process to create artifacts or documents before I send to my supervisor. It helps a lot. So I recommend you to find a friend or someone who's from your area of interest that is accessible for you, and it's really wraps a lot. The okay, you should also decide when to go shallow or deep. What I mean, uh, sometimes you have to really be an expert in your area of research, and sometimes you don't. You only have to know the concepts, but you don't have to be expert. If you try to go deep in all areas of interest, you will get in panic because it's not possible. So you have to know your area of research, and you have to decide where you can go deep or where you can just grab some concepts to understand the topic. Here you probably need help. I use an example here. When I moved to education, I started reading about Piaget and Vygotsky. I don't know if you know them. They are probably the main authors in learning theories, but it's a old literature, and I was read a lot about it. So when I talked to my friend, and he said that it's a old literature that I only supposed to know superficially about them, because there are a lot of new researches based on them that is more interest. So talk to your friends, your peers, to know where you are supposed to read more or less. I will give now a broader view of my area of research. It starts with the program education. And program education relates to the difficulties students face while learning to program, and the solution that we can propose to mitigate this problem. It's a very complex topic. It has been researched for more than 50 years, and we still have no solution for that problem because it's impacted by many variables: the professor, the students, the institution. So it's kind of hard to control all of these variables, but we can propose some interventions to reduce or mitigate some of these problems. And specifically, I'm interested on the use of self-regulated learning in program education. As I said before, regulation of learning is a ability or a skill that some students have, and there's a lot of evidence in literature that proves that high achieving students or successful students use more regulation of learning. So we are here interested in developing regulation of learning in students, specifically by program students. And what I'm going to propose is the use of social shared regulation of learning. It's this regulation of learning in groups or in pairs. In my PhD, it has been researched, but not so much. Main authors focus on the self-regulated learning program education, and here I'm interested in developing the social process in program education. When I was reading about social shared regulation of learning, I was kind of lost in the beginning about what is this. It was a new topic, So after reading a lot, I got the concepts, and later I was figuring out how to apply these to my area of interest, that is program education, and more specifically how to use computers to support SSRL. So I found that a lot of educational researchers were using computers to support this process, and they were using what is known as computer-supported collaborative learning. It's basically the use of computers to support a group of students. And this was a new topic for me, so didn't had any knowledge about it. So I started doing a systematic literature review, and it was reading a lot of other papers to grasp the main concepts. And this was how I connected program education, social shared regulation of learning, and computers in education. And that is the main focus of my uh, process. As I said before, I had to decide when I should go shallow or deep in my reading. So I present here the concepts that I talked before. The darker the color is, the deeper I should go. The lighter the colors, less I should read about it. So I had to read a lot about program education. I read. I had to understand what are the difficulties students face, what was proposed, what works, and what does not. So this, in fact, the literature points that usually programming education is a abstract topic, so it's hard to students for students to apply previous knowledge, for example, and self-regulation of learning helps in it. So I started reading a lot about program education. Later, I have to know about what is self-regulated learning, how to stimulate it because it's possible, and so on. It also applies to shared regulation of learning, and I have to read about computer supported collaborative learning because I will use this kind of software to stimulate the regulation process. Okay, I think one of the my uh, initial problems during the PhD was to understand what is a PhD thesis. I had this problem during my master's. So after I figured out what my supervisor was expecting of me, it helped me a lot during my work. So uh, I believe now I have an understanding about what UC is expecting as a PhD thesis. I suggest you to look at the other theses, especially in your area of research, because you can understand what they did, how they did. It helps a lot. Talk to your advisor, your supervisor. In fact, Antonio helped me a lot to figure out how do I move from uh, an educational area that is self-regulation of learning to a computer area, because as I partnered with my friend in 2008 in my the doctor in cognitive psychology, I was going into more in the educational area. So I had to understand what is expected by a computer science PhD, and Antonio helped me get into it. And later, I understood that this process should be keep keys. Also, our professor Paquet talk about it. What is keys? Keys keep it simple, stupid. So I believe now a PhD is not only about what you produce. So in the beginning, I was expecting to produce a huge, complex software that does everything, but I realized that what's more important is the impact that I produce to my area of research, and also the process that I do to get into the outcome of my PhD, the use of a scientific process. It's basically the how that matters. Also, this tip was gave to me by my master's supervisor. Is that you should focus on research what you can measure. So, for example, if you're doing a research about Alzheimer, how are you going to get the data about Alzheimer? Can you apply your intervention to patients with Alzheimer? It might sound obvious, but some students get lost during this process. My advice here is just do something that you can measure. And in my specific case, I'm a professor in Brazil. So what I will develop in my PhD, I'm expecting to do some experiments with my students. And if I wasn't a professor, probably would be I would have problem in getting students to validate my work. So it's important here. Now I will focus on my research problems. It's not research questions. I already have, but I try to give here a broader view of my research problems. The first problem is how does students regulate in collaborative program activities? In fact, I'm interested in the process that they do. For example, if two to four students are doing a group activity, what are the regulation strategies they use during this process? Based on the literature, it's not well understood. We need further investigations to understand this process. And this will base my design of my computer supported collaborative learning. I will develop this software based on what I already know in the literature, but what I will found investigating students during collaborative activities. And later, the software that I expect to develop can really stimulate the use of regulation of learning process. And I reduce the regulation of learning process related to program achievement. It's one of the main problems that I expected to research. And here is my objective during the PhD. It's to build a software and expecting to stimulate, because there is more than 20 years of research on regulation of learning. And we already know that it's possible to stimulate the regulation of learning skills. So I'm expecting to stimulate these skills in the program education. And I'm expecting that this stimulus will help then in learning program concepts. I probably my PhD would be these four topics that I show in this picture. First, literature review that I already did, and I'm finished here with shared regulation of learning. I know that I have to read more about this topic, so I almost close to finish this literature review. And second, I have to understand how this happens in program education, because it's known that regulation of learning it differs between areas. So I have to understand how this specifically happens in the program education. Uh, the third process should be the development of a computer-supported collaborative learning based on the findings of this understanding. And the fourth, evaluation. It would be experimental evaluation, and I hope this led to a PhD. I will talk about my methodology that I'm refining this process. It's not well, it's not really defining, but probably would be that way. That I was talking yesterday with my supervisor. Uh, as I said before, I have the development of a software that's a CSCL, but I will start. I will not wait for the second step, that is the understanding of the social process to develop the software. I will start with a software based on the literature finds that I already have, and on my knowledge about how to stimulate regulation of learning in collaborative activities. This software will be used to understand the social process. So I have some suppositions and I'm trying to understand if they are correct or wrong. The results of these suppositions will be used to refine this software, and later I expected to evaluate this with my students in Brazil, and I will try to also validate here in Portugal. The methodology I will describe here is more specifically to understand the process that students do during regulation of learning. I will use a qualitative study because authors in the past have found that it's the most adequate or the most used to understand how students use regulation of learning and how one student helps on others to regulate. So my focus here is on students from the first and second year. Why? The first, because my focus on intervention will be with novice programmers from the first year, but I'm also interested in understanding how students that already have some programming concepts, for example, from second or third year of computer education, how do they apply the regulation of learning during collaborative program activities? So I'm focused on these two groups of students. I will use interaction analysis, basically through video analysis. So I will have a camera recording the interaction between students. I will just be observing then to work collaboratively, and I will analyze and use a coding to understand if one specific interaction relates to a specific regulation of learning strategy. And on the literature, we know that we have general regulation of learning skills that are applied in multiple educational contexts, but we also have specific regulation of learning that applies, for example, to the program education. Let me give an example. When a student does a flow chart, it's a specific action related to program education, and it's a regulation of learning. So the objective here is to understand how this happens. And in fact, we don't know this, and the literature focus mostly on individual process. So here I'm interested on the collaborative process, and I'm also expecting to use some coding uh, from related literature, but also to develop my own coding if needed. This process is in definition, so it's not well defined, but it's for sure it will be a qualitative study with these students with interaction analysis. But the process, if I'm going with a predefined coding, or I will define the code based on the data, for example, the grounding theory is not defined. We're discussing this process. To evaluate the software, it will be a quantitative study. And here probably I will spend the most of my time during the PhD, because educational interventions take long time to be effective. So I'm expecting here to take 1 to 2 years of evaluation. And here is a kind of a problem, because if I do something wrong, I will lost a lot of time, and the time I have to make modifications will be very strict. So uh, I expected to do this part really well. The focus will be with students from first year of computer education. It's based on introductory programming classes, right? We use pre and post test to evaluate the program knowledge and also the regulation of learning. We use a control group, probably would be a group of students that will also do a collaborative activity, but without the software. And we are expecting to use a longitudinal study. It's what does it mean? The intervention probably will take 6 months. That's the duration of a class in my institution. So after 6 months, we will be continuously evaluating the students about the regulation of learning skills to see if the if the system promotes the use and development of self-regulation of learning skills, does it persist over time after the intervention? Because maybe the intervention is only effective during the intervention itself. So I'm here interested if you understand if it persists uh, during the time. So it will be a longitudinal study, and I'm expected to after 1 year from the beginning of the experiment to collect data over the students to understand if the stimulus was in fact effective. And my objective with this evaluation is to stimulate her regulation of learning, as I said before, but also to understand if it was effective in promoting the grasp of programming concepts by students. It's my last tip here is that your PGs should be a narrative process. It's kind of a history that you are presenting to others. And I believe that everybody should have a focus on what's your next steps in your thesis. It takes a time to understand the big picture, where you should go, what you should do next. But I, I really advise for students to have this knowledge of what you're doing, will be your next step, and also focus on what are the publication opportunities you will have in your PhD. I will describe here some of my opportunities. This was the big picture that I previously showed. Let's get a bit more into details. Uh, During the literature review, I found 4 opportunities for publication. The first one was a systematic literature review on the use of computer-supported collaborative learning in program education. We already had 2 literature reviews published, but they focused on a broader scope, not only in program education, but in computer science education. So we did a literature review already. It was accepted for publication in the IEEE Educon that will be held in Porto this month. I'm working in another systematic literature review about regulation of learning in program education. I haven't found other literature reviews about this relationship of regulation of learning and program education. So we started doing this literature review, and it's already in progress. Also, I focus on building a conceptual framework. And what is this? It's basically a description on how can I implement computer-supported collaborative learning in program education. So I use the findings from my systematic literature review and the findings that I already have from previous reading process to construct a framework. It's not a software framework, okay? It's a theoretical work, and it's in progress. My expectations here is that this conceptual framework will support the development of my software. So I'm expecting here to finish this in 2 months and submit to evaluation. And also I'm expecting to build a conceptual framework about the regulation of learning in program education, also based on the findings from my systematic literature reviews. So if I'm expecting to stimulate regulation of learning, how should I do that process? And this conceptual framework will help during the way. Also, the qualitative study that I mentioned before, it's expected to produce a publication based on the analysis, the study itself. The evaluation of the software also came landed to publications. Each experiment can be a publication isolated. And also we can have a complete analysis of all experiments. It probably would be in the end of my PhD, and probably the most important publication of my work. And that's all. I hope it was kind of length. I know I presented more than my work, but I expected that my tips help other students during the PhD. Okay, thank you. Is there any questions?
Any questions for anyone?
Well, I have two questions. Not two questions, but to clarify some things.
Okay.
First of all, thanks for your presentation. It was
Thanks.
really good. I would like you to summarize in one sentence what is your main objective and what is your problem that you are facing.
Okay. Let me start with the problem. It's known in the literature that regulation of learning is related to academic success, but we don't have understanding if this applies to program education. So my objective with my thesis is to build a software to support the use of regulation of learning and measure if this stimulus is effective in promoting the learning of program concepts.
Okay, so you said that you have done the literature review, right?
Yes.
So do you have an enemy? So in other words, someone's doing something like this?
Yes, I do. In fact, I found this enemy a month ago. It was a Ph.D. thesis here in Portugal.
From
It
where?
was a I forgot the university, but what she was looking for also understanding how regulation of learning occurs in groups, but she didn't focus on the intervention itself. She wasn't looking to promoting regulation of learning in groups. She was more interested in understanding how pairs of students they work collaboratively. And in my work, I'm interested in more than pairs, but in students working with 3, 4, or 5 students in
groups.
program activity. Yes.
Nice. Someone has questions?
I have a question. Sorry, do you want to ask?
You can go
first?
Yeah.
Okay. So my question, you said that you are trying to do some regulation and try to measure it in the programming education, right? What
Yes.
kind of regulation are you planning on applying with those students? And also I have another question, but you can answer this one first.
Okay, thank you. Based on the literature findings from the systematic literature review that I mentioned before, I found that all the literature focus on general regulation of learning and specific regulation of learning. General are any kind of regulation that applies to any educational domain, and program education is specific program education. So, for example, we already have a software that was developed in my institution under my supervision, and we do one regulation that is before the students write the code, he has to answer some questions about the problem that he will have to answer. And for example, we ask what is the problem you are going to solve? What are the variables are you going to use? What are the conditionals? These are questions that are expected to regulate the student to help him during the program activity. It's one example. Another example, for example, that we're expecting to use it in collaborative groups is the students during a program activity, a collaborative program activity, will see what are the main programming errors students are committing. Let me exemplify this situation. Let's suppose we have student ABC. The student A is doing a lot of problems with conditionals. So other students can see this information and can help him in understand the correct syntax, for example, for conditionals. So currently I'm trying to understand how this regulation of learners can be adapted to the program education is one of my challenges.
So from my understanding, an example of regulation in our area is to ask some questions for the students to guide their programming, their development process before starting writing the code. Is that correct?
Yes, it's correct.
Okay, so now I'll go to my next question. I think
Okay.
that you showed in one of the slides that you are going to do some evaluation with the students, yeah, if you can go to that. Yeah, this one, this quantitative studies. And you are saying that you're going to spend about 1 to 2 years of your PhD in this evaluation.
Yes.
From my understanding, you should do your PhD in about 4 years, if I'm not mistaken. And if you're going to spend like 1/4 or half of your PhD in this evaluation, for me, it seems like a huge risk for you.
Yes.
How are you handling, how are you managing, how are you mitigating this risk? So this is my question.
Okay, thank you. In education, we have a problem because interventions have to last for some months to be effective. It's well understood. So, in fact, it's probably my biggest problem because each class in my institution has 6 months. So I'm supposed to have 2 classes of students. That's about 60 students in my class. Uh, well, it's not a huge sample for educational purpose. So I have I expected to do the evaluation by myself, and I'm expecting to work with about 100 or 130 students to get a significant sample size. But if the things doesn't go as well, I'm expecting to ask some other professors from other institutions to use the software. I already know some of them, and but the problem with that perspective is that I lost a kind of control over some variables, and that might be like let me say it might not be positive for my experiment. So I'm trying to figure out an equilibrium between I doing myself or asking other professors to do this evaluation process.
But when are you planning to start it?
uh, we already have one software developed, but it focused on individual regulation of learning. We was expecting to use this semester, but the class was suspended in Brazil, so it kind of ruined our plans because although the experiment was individual regulation of learning, it could grasp some knowledge about that process that can help us in the collaborative learning. So I'm going back to Brazil in the end of the year. So I'm expecting to start this experiment in 2021 as a professor, as of returning to my class. So it probably would be in 2021 and 2022 during the experiments.
Okay. I'm really seeing this as a huge risk for you, not only
Yes.
because it's a risk by itself, but also due to the classes that are not happening at the moment. And at this point, I'm not sure when they are going to be back to
Yes.
normal, if they will in the next 2-year time frame. So yeah,
Yes.
I think this is something that maybe you need to reframe or try to do something that
Yeah.
is not presidential physical. Yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I have another problem that I have is, for example, if after 1 year of evaluation, for example, if I see that the software isn't doing well, I will probably don't have time to change it a lot to create modifications, for example. So I am discussing with my supervisor on how to tackle this problem. But probably would be to ask other professors to use the evaluation, or to create specific courses. For example, a 2-month course in program education. But this reduces my objectives as well. But thank you for your question.
Leonardo, you said that you are going to develop or use a software to validate your methodology.
Yes.
How do you differentiate the outcomes and the impact that comes from the methodology or from the software? What I mean is, if something didn't go as you expected, the problem will be, can the problem be related to the software or not your methodology? How do you differentiate those outcomes?
Okay, we're expecting to use some usability tests, for example, in the software to understand if the user experience is doing well. It's one of the possibilities to understand if the problem is within the software. For example, I'm expecting to present the software to experts in the area. My friend can help with that. He's a psychologist, so he can see if it has a theoretical foundation that is okay. To understand if the methodology is going well or not, we're going to use pre and post tests, and we are basing here in tests that are already used by cognitive psychologists, researchers, and by programming researchers. So I believe after the first intervention, I will have probably a better understanding about my software and the methodology, if it's well suited or not.
Okay. Any questions? Any more questions or comment? No. So, Dave, do you want to talk about a little bit about the initiative or the next meetings or something like that?
You can start, then I go.
Okay. The Talk2Peers was an initiative that started last year. We wanted to create some meetings that in an informal manner. This talk about the Leonardo, it was a little bit more than kind formal. It's not as informal as we expected, but he covers maybe 2 talks in just one. And we want that you suggest any topics or come to present some ideas that need support or validation by some peers like us. We are trying to find more peers to present. We are planning to do a weekly talk, but the availability of any peers that will lead the frequency of the meetings. So I suggest that you use those forms that I put in the chat to suggest any talks or suggest something related to the format, the day and the hour, if it's not okay for anyone. And if you want to present something, you can fill the form also. And I think it is any other topic to comment, Dave?
I think it's kind of this. I think the idea here is that you can share what you're facing so you can try to help you, because sometimes someone has faced that your problem and can help you with the solution. So we try here to have a friendly environment to talk about our problems in the PhD. So everyone is invited to give a talk, and let's do it. That's it.
Okay, thank you everyone to spend some time with us, and I will get some information. I think that the next meeting will be the Leo Moreira, if I'm not wrong. And I will send the email and post the notification in Facebook. Okay? Thank you, everyone. See you.
Okay, thank you, Charles.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you to everybody. Good afternoon.
Everyone.
Bye. Thank you. Congratulations.
Bye.